At 59, I had made peace with the idea that I would live the rest of my life in the singular tense. I had my garden, my paid-off bungalow in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta, and the respect of a community where I'd served as a head nurse for 30 years. I didn't need a man to validate my existence. My silence was comfortable. It was a well-worn coat. Then Dr. Min-June Park, a retired literature professor with eyes like polished obsidian and a soul full of ghosts, began sitting on the bench outside my front gate. I told myself he was just a neighbor. I told myself that two people from such different worlds, a black woman from the South with calloused hands and a Korean academic with soft, ink-stained fingers, had nothing in common but the setting sun. I reminded myself that I was 59, not 29. My heart wasn't a toy to be wound up again. But I didn't know that he hadn't stopped watching me since the day I offered him a cup of ginger tea. If you've ever believed it was too late for you, if you've ever convinced yourself that dignity is better than passion, this story might change your mind. Because I learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to get a man to truly see you is to completely disappear from his view. The realization didn't happen with a shout. It didn't happen with a thrown vase or a slammed door. In my experience, the most devastating moments in a woman's life happen in absolute quiet. It happened on a Tuesday. For 6 months, Min-June and I had existed in a delicate, undefined space. It was a routine. At 10 a.m., he would walk down the street from his pristine, modern house, the one that always looked cold, no matter how bright the sun was, and pause by my hydrangeas. I would be there, wearing my gardening gloves, and we would talk. We didn't talk about the weather. We talked about philosophy. We talked about the loss of his wife, Ji-yoon, 5 years ago. We talked about my late husband, terrifying and wonderful, who had passed a decade prior. We were intellectually intimate, emotionally tethered, but we were physically miles apart. He never touched my hand. He never complimented my dress. He treated me like a trusted colleague, a sounding board for his grief. I told myself it was enough. The kind of woman I was didn't beg for scraps. The kind of woman I was found satisfaction in being a safe harbor. "Regina," he said that Tuesday, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a tweed jacket, despite the Georgia humidity. "My daughter Hannah is coming to visit from Chicago next week." I smiled, wiping dirt from my trowel. "That's wonderful, Min-June. You've been missing her." He looked down at his loafers. "Yes, it has been a long time. I was hoping you might help me prepare the house. You have such a way with warmth. My home feels like a museum." My heart gave a small, foolish flutter. He wanted me to make his home warm. "Of course," I said. "And perhaps I can meet her. You talk about her so much." The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't a comfortable silence. It was a wall. Min-June cleared his throat. He looked past me toward the oak tree down the street. Well, I think it might be best if we kept our visits paused while she is here." I froze. The wind chimes on my porch tinkled, a stark contrast to the sudden coldness in my chest. "Paused? She is very traditional," he said, his voice lowering as if he were confessing a crime. "She worries about me. She worries about my reputation. If she sees me spending so much time with a neighbor, she might misunderstand." "Misunderstand what, Min-June?" My voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who has delivered bad news to families in waiting rooms. That I am not focusing on my legacy, on my wife's memory. He finally looked at me and I saw the panic in his eyes, but I also saw the cowardice. She would not understand us. Us. The word hung there, hollow. There was no us. There was just him, taking my time, my emotional labor, my tea, and my listening ear, and keeping me hidden in the garden like a dirty secret. He didn't want to disrupt his daughter's image of the grieving, noble Korean widower. He didn't want the complication of a black woman in the picture. I wasn't good enough for the living room. I was only good enough for the garden gate. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't list the hours I had spent comforting him when the loneliness was too much. I simply nodded. I understand, Minjun. You do? He looked relieved. The relief hurt more than the rejection. Thank you, Regina. You are a good friend, a very sensible woman. Yes, I said, peeling off my gardening gloves. I laid them on the bench between us. I'm very sensible. I turned around and walked up the steps to my porch. Regina, he called out, will you still help me with the house arrangements tomorrow? I reached my front door and opened it. I didn't look back. No, Minjun, I don't think I will. I stepped inside and locked the door. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't make tea. I sat in my hallway, in the dark, and listened to the silence. It wasn't the silence of peace anymore. It was the silence of a woman who realized she had been auditioning for a role that had already been cast. I decided then and there. I wasn't going to pause. I was going to stop. 3 days passed. I didn't go out to the garden. I saw him walk by, pause at the gate, look at my closed blinds, and walk away. On the 4th evening, a Friday, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Minjun. Regina, the house feels very empty. Hana arrives tomorrow. I do not know how to arrange the flowers. Please. I looked at the screen. The audacity. He still thought he could summon me. I was about to delete the message when a car pulled into my driveway. It wasn't Minjun. It was a sleek black sedan. My son Marcus stepped out. He wasn't supposed to be here. He lived in D.C. He was a corporate attorney, sharp as a razor and just as protective. He walked up to the porch, his face tight. I opened the door before he could knock. Marcus, what's wrong? He walked past me into the living room, tossing a file folder onto my coffee table. It slid across the wood and hit my Bible. Mom, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You never told me you were spending time with the guy across the street. Minjun? We're just neighbors. Why? Because, Marcus said, loosening his tie. I ran a background check on the neighborhood. Just routine. But I found something on your Professor Park. He tapped the file. He's not a widower, Mom. His wife died, yes. But he's legally engaged to a woman in Seoul. The paperwork was filed 6 months ago, right around the time he started drinking your tea. The geometry of a lie. The air in my living room seemed to vanish. I stared at the manila folder as if it were a coiled snake. Engaged? The word felt foreign in my mouth. Arranged, looks like, Marcus said, pacing the room. He was a big man, broad-shouldered like his father, and he filled the space with restless energy. 2 families merging assets, old school. He's set to move back to Korea in 3 months to finalize it. Did he mention that? I sat down slowly on the arm of the sofa. No. He talks about loneliness. He talks about the past. He's playing you, Marcus said bluntly. He wants a comfort woman here until he goes back to his real life there. I don't like it, Ma. I don't like him watching you. He isn't watching me anymore, I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. I ended it, before it even started. But the information burned. Engaged? While he sat on my bench and looked at me with those soulful, sad eyes. While he let me bake him persimmon bread. While he let me soothe the tremors in his hands. It wasn't just rejection, it was deception by omission. He had used my empathy as a waiting room. Good, Marcus said, because if he comes near this porch again, I'm going to have a conversation with him. You will do no such thing, I snapped, the mother in me rising up. I'm 59 years old, Marcus. I handle my own affairs. You're here for the weekend. We're going to eat pot roast, we're going to go to church, and we're not going to talk about the man across the street. But avoiding the topic proved impossible. The next morning, Saturday, the disruption arrived. I was in the kitchen with Marcus making coffee when a knock came at the door. Not a hesitant knock, a sharp, rapid rapping. Marcus moved to answer it, but I held up a hand. Sit. I opened the door. Standing there was a young Korean woman. She was impeccable. Sharp bob haircut, designer trench coat, eyes that scanned me up and down with clinical precision. This was Hana, and behind her, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, was Min Jun. "Good morning," the young woman said. Her English was flawless, clipped. "You are Regina?" "I am Miss King," I corrected gently. "Can I help you?" "My father left this at your house," she said, holding out a Tupperware container, one of mine. "He says he has been eating your food." There was an accusation in her tone, as if I had been poisoning him. Min Jun stepped forward, his face pale. "Hana, please, I told you, Miss King is a kind neighbor." "Neighbor?" Hana repeated. She looked at me, then passed me into my house. She saw Marcus standing in the hallway, arms crossed, staring daggers at Min Jun. Hana's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. She turned to her father. "You did not tell me she had company, men." The implication was subtle, but it hit me like a slap. She was judging my virtue. She was wondering what kind of woman lived alone and entertained her father. "Min Jun," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Take your daughter and go home." "Regina, I just wanted to return the container," Min Jun stammered. He looked terrified. He looked at me, pleading with his eyes for me to be the bigger person, to be the sensible woman who absorbs the insult so he doesn't have to deal with the conflict. I had done that for too many years. I had done it for doctors who thought I was the cleaning lady. I had done it for bank tellers who checked my ID twice. I wasn't going to do it for the man I had almost loved. "Thank you for the container," I said, taking it. "And Min Jun, congratulations on your engagement. I hope the move back to Seoul goes smoothly." The color drained from Min Jun's face completely. He looked like he had been shot. Hana whipped her head around to look at her father. "You told her?" Min Jun stuttered. "I didn't." "Goodbye," I said, and I closed the door. I leaned against the wood, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Boom," Marcus said softly from the hallway. "That's my girl." But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a deep, aching hollow in my chest. I had exposed him, yes, but I had also severed the last thread. That night, the storm broke. A literal Georgia thunderstorm shaking the windows. Marcus had gone to bed. I was sitting up, reading the same page of my Bible over and over again. Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart." My phone rang. It was a landline call. I hesitated, then picked up. "Regina." It was Min Jun. His voice was slurring slightly. He was drunk? He never drank. "Do not call here, Min Jun." It is not what you think," he rasped. "The engagement, it was my brother's idea, a business arrangement. I never said yes. I never signed." "You never said no," I countered. "And you never told me." "Because I was afraid," he shouted. The raw emotion in his voice startled me. "I was afraid if I told you, you would see me as baggage, as a man with too many obligations." "I see you as a coward, Min Jun." "I am coming over," he said. "No, you are not." "I am standing on your porch." I gasped. I hadn't heard him through the thunder. I moved to the window and peered through the blinds. He was there, drenched in the rain, standing under the porch light. He looked wretched, but he wasn't alone. A car had pulled up to the curb. Not his, not Marcus's. A taxi. And stepping out of it wasn't Hana. It was an older Korean woman, elegant, severe, holding a large umbrella. She walked up the driveway with purpose. "Min Jun!" she called out. Min Jun froze on my porch. He looked at the woman, then at my door. "Oh my God," I whispered to the empty room. It was the woman from the photo he kept on his mantle. The wife. The dead wife. Except she clearly wasn't dead. The point of no return. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My mind couldn't process the visual data. Min Jun had wept on my patio about burying her. He had described the funeral lilies. I unlocked the door and threw it open. Min Jun turned. waters, dripping from his nose. He looked at me, then back at the woman on the walkway. "Ji-yoon?" he whispered. The woman stopped at the bottom of the steps. She looked at Min-jun with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. Then she looked at me. "He thinks I'm his wife," the woman said to me, her voice heavily accented but clear. "I am his sister-in-law, Ji-yoon's twin." The breath rushed out of me. A twin. "Min-jun," the woman said firmly, stepping onto the porch. "Come inside. You're confusing the past with the present again." Again. The word hung in the humid air. Marcus appeared behind me, a baseball bat in his hand. "What is going on out here?" Min-jun looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic. "Regina, tell her. Tell her I'm not confused. I'm here for you. I'm here to explain the engagement." "He has early onset dementia," the sister-in-law said. She said it casually, brutally. "It is why Hana is here. It is why the engagement was arranged, to a nurse in Seoul who can care for him. He forgets things. He forgets he agreed to it." I looked at Min-jun, the man who quoted Nietzsche, the man who remembered the Latin names of all my flowers. "No," Min-jun said, backing away. "No, that is a lie. They are trying to control me. Regina, look at me. Do I look sick? Do I sound sick?" He didn't. He sounded desperate. He sounded like a man fighting for his life. "I didn't tell you about the engagement because I was fighting it," he cried, grabbing my hand. His skin was freezing wet. "I wanted to stay here, with you. I wanted to ask you." He fumbled in his wet pocket. "Min-jun, stop," the sister-in-law commanded. He pulled out a small velvet box. "I wanted to ask if you would let me stay," he said, his voice breaking. "Not as a neighbor, as yours." My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "He doesn't know what he is doing," the sister-in-law said, reaching for his arm. "He has episodes. He thinks he is in love." "I am in love!" Min-jun roared, pulling away from her. He looked at me, water streaming down his face, mixing with tears. "I realized it the moment you walked away, Regina. The silence was too loud. I cannot live in the silence anymore." I stood there, between the protective rage of my son, the cold pragmatism of the sister-in-law, and the desperate, soaking wet man holding a ring I never asked for. This was the moment. The dignity I prized so much demanded I close the door. A woman of my age, of my standing, does not get involved with a man whose family claims he is losing his mind. It is messy. It is tragic. But then I looked at his eyes. They weren't cloudy. They weren't confused. They were terrified of being erased. "Marcus," I said quietly, "put the bat down." "Mom, you can't be serious," Marcus hissed. "He is not a child," I said. I looked at the sister-in-law, and he is not a prisoner. He is on my property, and if he has something to say, I'm going to listen. "He is sick," the woman insisted. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he's just lonely and you're inconveniently in the way." I took Min-jun's hand. "Come inside, Min-jun. You're shivering." "Regina," the sister-in-law stepped forward. "If you take him inside, we will call the police. We have medical power of attorney. He is not competent." Min-jun froze on the threshold. He looked at the sister-in-law, then at the ground. The fight seemed to drain out of him. "Power of attorney?" he whispered. "Since last month, Min-jun," she said. "You signed it. Don't you remember?" He looked at me, panic rising in his chest. I don't remember." He looked at the ring in his hand. Then he looked at me with absolute horror. "Regina," he gasped, if I don't remember that, do I remember us correctly? Is this real?" He clutched his head. "Am I making you up?" He swayed. His eyes rolled back. "Min-jun!" I screamed. He collapsed forward, crashing onto the hardwood floor of my foyer, the ring skittering across the floorboards until it hit Marcus's shoe. "Call 911!" I yelled, dropping to my knees. Minjun was seizing. I went into nurse mode instantly, turning him to his side, protecting his head. But as I held him, looking at his gray face, the sister-in-law stood in the doorway, unmoving. "It is too late," she said coldly. "We are taking him home." "You are not touching him," I roared, a sound that came from the deepest part of my gut. But then Minjun's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, but there was no recognition. "Who are you?" he whispered. "The Winter Garden." The ambulance lights were a silent disco in my living room. I rode with him. Marcus followed in his car. The sister-in-law and Hannah stayed behind, presumably to call lawyers. In the emergency room, the chaos was familiar. I had worked in hospitals for 40 years. I knew the rhythm, but this time I wasn't the nurse. I was the neighbor. I stood in the corner of the trauma bay while they worked on him. They stabilized him. It wasn't a seizure caused by dementia. It was extreme stress and dehydration, compounded by a medication interaction. When the doctor came out, I stepped forward. "Are you family?" the doctor asked. I hesitated. "I am his person." The doctor looked tired. "He's asking for Regina. Is that you?" I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I walked into the room. Minjun was hooked up to IVs. He looked frail. "You recognized me," I said, pulling a chair up to the bed. He smiled weakly. "I never forgot you, Regina. That was fear, panic. When she said I signed papers, I felt my mind snap." "Did you sign them?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. I was so depressed after Ji-yoon died. I signed many things Hannah put in front of me." He reached for my hand. "Regina, they want to take me back to Seoul. They want to put me in a facility. They say it is for my health, but it is for the assets. If I am incompetent, they control the estate." "I know," I said. I had seen it happen a dozen times with elderly patients. "I don't want to go," he said. "I want to sit in your garden. I want to argue about Tolstoy. I want to drink your tea." "Then don't go," I said. "They have the law," he said. "And I have a son who is a very expensive corporate attorney," I said, a small smile touching my lips. Minjun squeezed my hand. "Why? Why would you fight for me? I insulted you. I hid you. I was ashamed." "You were afraid," I corrected. "There is a difference. And I am fighting because I am 59 years old, Minjun, and I have realized that dignity isn't about walking away when things get hard. Dignity is about standing your ground for the things that matter." He looked at me with such intensity that I felt 18 again. "You matter, Regina." "I know," I said. "And you do too." The door to the hospital room banged open. Hannah marched in, followed by the sister-in-law and 2 men in suits. "Get away from him," Hannah said. "We are transferring him to a private facility." "No," Minjun said, his voice raspy but firm. He sat up a little straighter. "I am staying." "You are not competent to decide," one of the suits said. "He is lucid, oriented times 4, and under the care of this hospital," I said, standing up and blocking the bed. "And until he is discharged, you will not move him." "Marcus!" I yelled toward the hallway. My son appeared in the doorway, holding his briefcase. He looked at the men in suits, then at me. He smiled, a shark's smile. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, stepping into the room. "I'm Marcus King, attorney at law. We need to talk about this so-called power of attorney, because unless it was filed in the state of Georgia, it's going to have a very hard time holding up against a man who is currently asking you to get the hell out of his room." Hannah looked furious. The sister-in-law looked nervous. Minjun looked at me. "Regina," he said softly, ignoring the legal battle erupting at the foot of his bed. "The ring. I dropped it." "I have it," I said. I reached into my pocket. I had picked it up before the paramedics arrived. "I cannot offer you a simple life," he said. "I come with lawyers and daughters who hate you and a brain that might betray me one day." "I've raised 3 children and run a trauma ward," I said, looking at the simple gold band. "I don't like simple," Then will you keep it? He asked. Not as a neighbor? I looked at the chaos in the room. I looked at the man in the bed. This wasn't the fairy tale. This was the messy, hard, beautiful work of a second bloom. I'll hold on to it, I said, closing my hand over the ring. Ask me again when we get you back to the garden. He smiled, and for the first time, the ghosts in his eyes were gone. But as Marcus ushered the angry family out of the room, the sister-in-law stopped. She looked at me with a chilling calmness. You think you have won, she said, but you do not know about the other wife. I froze. The other wife? You said you were the sister-in-law. I am, she smiled. But Min Jun was married twice before. And the first one, she never actually signed the divorce papers. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the hospital linoleum. I looked back at Min Jun. He had closed his eyes, exhausted. I held the ring tight in my fist. We had the garden. We had the lawyers. But the past wasn't done with us yet. To be continued.